It's time to talk about Dynasty. Dynasty rookies, Dynasty sleepers currently in the NBA, and we're going to do it with Matt Lawson. Michael Bolton.
Thanks, Josh. It's Michael Bolton here, and it's time for another episode of the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast. Let's get to it.
Let's get to it, indeed.
You are Locked On Fantasy Basketball, your daily fantasy basketball podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network.
Hello and welcome to the Locked On Fantasy Basketball Podcast, brought to you by Basketball Monster. My name is Josh Lloyd and RIP Jerry West. I'm also the lead fantasy analyst at basketballmonster.com, and you can find me on Twitter, as always, at redrock_bball, on TikTok at redrock_bball, and on Instagram at Locked On Fantasy Basketball. Today's episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use the code Locked On NBA for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you also for making Locked On Fantasy Basketball your first listen every day. We are free, and we are available on all platforms, so double bang and thumb and comment and all that stuff. It's exciting to talk Dynasty, and I love having Matt Lawson on to do it, so we might as well bring Matt Lawson in to talk Dynasty. Welcome back to the show, Matt Lawson. Good to have you here, mate.
Josh, I am thrilled to be here. It's my favorite time of the year. It's rookie draft season. And even with the 2024 draft class, I get so excited for this because there's so many hidden gems, so many fantasy producers that maybe are flying under the radar as real life contributors, as draft prospects that are going to get us excited for fantasy. I love this time of the year, and I especially love it too because we get to look back at past draft classes a little bit and find some of the guys who maybe are emerging now as second and third year players.
Yeah, we did this show last year where we looked more at the NBA guys versus the Dynasty rookies, just to sort of highlight some guys we thought were going to take a step forward. And from memory, I remember us talking quite a bit about Peyton Watson in that show as someone who sort of came on towards the end of the year, and we saw him establish himself as a regular rotation player, not as a full-time starter or anything, but did establish himself. So we're going to look through some NBA players that we're interested in, and when I asked you to put together a list of guys that you thought, I had my own list, and basically just hit every single one of the guys that I already had on my list, so we're sort of in alignment with that. And then we're going to talk about our individual Dynasty rookie ranks. People saw my Dynasty tiers a day or two ago, and then you've released yours out to your Patreon subscribers, and we'll just talk about a couple of guys, as my voice just dies, a couple of guys that we do differ on. So let's just get in and talk now, Matt, about the guys currently in the NBA, some guys that we might label as dynasty sleepers, I guess, and we are going to go straight to Brooklyn. And we're going to talk about Noah Clowney, a guy that I don't remember how you viewed him heading into the actual draft, but I really liked him. I thought the Nets got a real steal there. I had him close to a lottery player. He was really young coming into the season, and they never really got a chance until the end of the year. And then he was a key part. He played backup center. He started at power forward, and I was hyper impressed. And with this team going like literally nowhere, I think I don't know that he's going to start next season, but I wouldn't be shocked. Now, if you guys are watching on YouTube, at the top, you see the demographic stats. He's 6'10". He's almost 20 years old. Those numbers there are the numbers that he put up in the 4 starts. So it's 10.5 and 6.5 with 2 blocks. And he played 36 minutes in his 4 starts. Only 13 usage. And then the other numbers are his full season numbers. 4.1% block percentage, 17 defensive rebound percentage, rim frequency. So that's contesting shots in the 90th percentile. And he's 52 and 71 with his shooting. Do you think, Matt, that Noah Clowney will be at least in line to be a starter as early as like opening night next season?
I think it's possible, but this is a Nets roster that could be in complete flux this offseason because they have so little that's under contract going forward. We could see Nick Claxton coming back. We might not. Day'Ron Sharpe is nearing the end of his rookie deal, so he'll be returning. But that front court, even by itself, is in flux. A lot of the rest of the roster is as well, especially parts of the rotation that we saw last year for the Nets. I think that we saw enough from Clowney, and we have so little in the pipeline for the Nets as far as prospects right now that they owe it to at least give him a large rotation role going into the season because of what we saw at the end of last year. And it was impressive. I mean, we saw Clowney putting up some pretty elite numbers, especially at the rim. And this is where when I'm talking about breakout players, when I'm thinking about breakouts in Dynasty, it's not just about this guy is going to get more playing time. I want to be able to say, this guy is going to get more playing time because this aspect of his game has changed. And that the rim numbers and the amount of rim attempts for Clowney are the thing that we saw change in the G League before he was getting opportunity to play in Brooklyn. We saw him become an elite rim finisher, doubling his number of rim attempts from what he did at Alabama in a similar number of games. So this is a guy who kind of lived more out on the perimeter at Alabama. It's why I wasn't as high on him, because the three-point shooting was kind of interesting, but it wasn't super high volume.
It was iffy. It was like, maybe this projects out. I thought he could, but there were plenty of people who thought, I don't think so. And I don't even know where that still goes. But you're right. Like, it did change the way that those shots distributed when he got to the NBA.
Exactly. And that the great thing is that transferred over to him playing in the NBA and kind of that post All-Star period. He was highly efficient at the rim. Basketball Index had him at 97th percentile, around 89% at the rim. And those are very close rim attempts, a lot of dunks, but still, that's elite. And for a guy who is still really thin in his build, it's impressive and precocious, especially for, a guy who was around 19 years old during some of the season, to be able to do that in the NBA against NBA centers is impressive as a backup center and as a power forward starting next to and playing next to Sharp and Claxton quite a bit last year as well. So I'm intrigued. I think there is starter potential here. We need to see the three-point volume come up because we're still talking about low volume. Yes, he hit 36%, but I think what we're going to see from him is an ability to both be able to space the floor and to be able to finish at the rim. That can work offensively. Defensively, the all-in metrics did not really love Clowney's defense, and I think it's because the rim protection, while he's getting some blocks, he's not necessarily deterring anybody from getting to the rim, and he's contesting a lot of shots. He's converting some of them to blocks, but a lot of them are becoming clean attempts. He's going to have to improve there, and that's going to come with improved strength, timing, and getting used to NBA defense and improving his feel on that end.
Yeah, like he literally started 4 games, right? So like he blocked a lot of shots. Like I've got the rim frequency up there, 90th percentile in contesting shots, but it doesn't mean that it deterred people getting there. So he's got to be better in that area, but I'm pretty sure he's going to be. The guy that I likened him to coming into the draft was a more modern Paul Millsap, a power forward who plays some smaller ball center who maybe can shoot threes, but he's a really good defensive player, but not going to be a high usage guy. And we know that has elite value in fantasy. And I think Clowney's going to be able to get there. I'm really interested to see where he goes. We got that little glimpse, but the thing that's interesting with this, and this is also like the Peyton Watson stuff, man. I don't want to spend too much time on Clowney because we've got 7 other guys we want to talk about. But that with Peyton Watson, like he'd started to do this damage in like the 25th of March and into the start of April when 80% of fantasy leagues were done. So people paid no attention to it. They didn't see it. And that's the same with Clowney. This happened in April where so many leagues were over. People had tuned out and they didn't see this. So they might be Noah Clowney. So I'll come in and let's theoretically say I rank him 170th or whatever heading into next season. People go, what are you talking about? Noah Clowney, bro, started 4 games. He's not that good. You go, yeah, but look at the way they transitioned and they moved him and the way that they looked at that, which was, I thought really interesting. But again, like we can't hang on Noah Clowney too long because there is a lot of other guys we've got to talk about, which coincidentally, Matt, when I chose the 4 players that we're going to talk about from an NBA perspective, every single one of them was a 6'10" big man. And I don't know why that was, but it was. So we're going to talk about that in just a second. But today's episode is brought to you by the Game Time app. It's NBA Finals time. Obviously, Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. And the prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer that you get to tip-off with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, as well as their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. You can also get Major League Baseball tickets. They're an official authorized ticket seller for Major League Baseball. You've got the flash deals and the zone deals. You just pick the area that you want to sit, and Game Time selects the best seat in that area, and you end up saving money by doing that. So download the Game Time app, take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Create the account, use the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create the account, redeem the code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets. Lowest price, guaranteed. I already spoiled it, Matt, but we're going to talk about another 6'10" big man coming up here. We're going to Miami. Different sort of big man, because we're looking at Little Chungus. Nikola Jovic, who is someone that I thought was overrated in his draft year. There were people who were considering him a lottery pick, a top 10 pick. I think some of that was he's a white European with a name that sounds like Nikola Jovic. So people started to overrate him. I didn't mind where he went to Miami at the end of that first round. I thought he was very disappointing as a rookie. I thought he struggled quite a bit at times this season, but we always look for little indicators, Matt. Well, I know I do. But the fact that Miami just kept starting him all season was interesting. Well, not all season. For a big chunk of the season, he started 38 games, even though they weren't big minutes, was important. And I think that with a complete lack of power forwards on this team, that there is a chance for Jovic in year 3 to step into more starts, but also more minutes. He only played 22 minutes a night in those starts. He averaged 9 and 5. He's never going to get defensive stats, it appears. But what's the thing that impressed you, I guess, around Jovic in year 2? And how did you view him in year 1 versus what you think of him now?
So this is a case where some of the things that I liked about Jovic pre-draft are still there, and some things have been added on that make me a lot more interested in him. The thing that I saw pre-draft that made me like Jovic, I didn't love him, but I liked him as a prospect, was that at his size, at 6'10", at a young age, playing in a professional league, he demonstrated some really interesting playmaking for his size.
Yep.
And anytime you have a guy who has a bit of a handle at 6'10" and can pass a little bit, I'm intrigued because you can see with we are seeing the rise, and it's been going on for a while, but it's really coming to fruition now of the 5-out offense. Putting guys on the floor with size who can dribble, pass, and shoot. That's how Oklahoma City and Boston both dominated in the regular season, and it's how Boston may be on their way to winning an NBA title. And being able to dribble, pass, and shoot is exactly why Miami was so persistent in keeping Jovic in their lineup, getting him opportunity, playing with their starters. And he delivered, at least in the shooting aspect this year. And I think the other aspects of that are there as well. But we're talking about a guy who just turned 21 years old and just hit 40% of his threes on 73rd percentile shooting volume. And we saw that even translate into the playoffs with his performance, where he was pressed into a little bit of additional action during the Heat's limited playoff run. That includes 42.9% on above the break threes. So this isn't just someone who's living and dying in the corner. We have some shot versatility here. He has an ability to be able to drive. The playmaking numbers are still solid. There's a lot still untapped here because we're pre-prime. And I think that's a big thing that we have to remember with these guys who come in super young. You're not going to hit your NBA prime until you're 24, 25 years old in a lot of cases. That's where you really start to see the full form of what a player is going to be. We're still years out of that with Jovic. And when a guy has this kind of skill set, that's why Miami is interested. That's why they're probably going to continue to press him into action. And the fact that he delivered to this degree in his age 20 season tells me that there might be more here than we originally thought.
I'm not going to tell you that he's awesome because I still don't think that he's awesome. Right? I think that it was fine where they drafted him. Again, my expectations were much lower on him than others. I thought he was actually worse than I thought he would be as a rookie. But he doubled his assist rate this season, and now he is over league average in terms of assist percentage. That's huge. 40% three-point shooting, that is huge. My concerns end up being with the rebounding, which are quite poor. His rebound numbers, 30th percentile for defensive rebounding ability. The shooting, 70% from the line, 46% from the field. Yes, he hit his threes, but the 2-point finishing is a real problem, and the lack of defensive stats. So that all leads to some significant fantasy concerns just because there's just a lot of downside there. Like, it is great. You have a big man who's 6'10", who shoots 40%, who can pass and has improved that significantly. That's all awesome. But you're right. He's 4 to 5 years away, or 4 to 5 years away from prime. Maybe that other stuff comes along. But at the moment, the shape of his game isn't quite there. To me, it's a little bit like we look at the numbers, there's some positives, but there's a lot of sort of the vibes around it. It's like the idea, the way they're pushing him, the improvement in areas makes you go, well, maybe this other stuff comes along. I think that, like, if you had to compare between the two guys we've spoken about, I feel way more confident in Clowney being a persistent and consistent fantasy guy. Do you view that the same way, or how do you view those deficiencies in Jovic's game? Because we saw a much larger sample from him in a large role this season.
Yeah, I think that the fantasy stat set for Clowney is better. I think I have more confidence in Jovic being able to play substantial minutes, maybe even big starters minutes at some point, because what he does is so valued in the league versus what Clowney does is theoretically valuable, but it also requires him to make a big leap defensively to get stronger. There's things that still need to be there. With Jovic, you can kind of see if a guy's 6'10" and the all-in metrics liked his defense, there's even a little bit of rim protection ability because of his size that started to emerge this year. If he can just at that size play functional defense and shoot at the level that he is, that's good enough to be able to get you a lot of minutes in the NBA. So the floor is high with Jovic in that regard. And I think he's a guy, even if he played big minutes, we might be talking about squeaking into the top 100 unless there's a substantial change in his role where he's playing point forward out there, which I don't see coming. Or he's suddenly racking up defensive stats that we're not seeing right now, which doesn't happen as often. Usually that comes out, that's a young man's game. Steals, maybe they can develop a little bit later as the player improves field, but if you're going to see big block numbers, usually that can come at an early age. So I don't think there's a big fantasy stat set here. I just think there's a lot of real life winning basketball contribution potential that could make Jovic a guy who gets a lot of minutes, either in a big rotation role or in a starting role for a long period of time.
Yeah, I can see that. I can see him being a 28-minute, 30-minute a night player who is 100th, 120th in fantasy in his prime, but is providing real life stuff, but it's not always translating, whereas Clowney might top out at 25 minutes, but is a better fantasy player because of the ability to put big chunks in certain categories to boost you up. And I think that big chunk in certain category idea brings us to talk about the next guy, who coincidentally, Matt, is a 6'10" big man. We're going to Indiana and we're talking about Isaiah Jackson. Now, Isaiah Jackson's been spoken about a lot. We thought there might be an Isaiah Jackson breakout in the 2022-23 season when every rumor seemed to suggest that Miles Turner was on his way out, and then Rick Carlisle said, no, actually Isaiah Jackson's going to be our third string guy behind Jalen Smith. But it seemed a pretty clear, maybe we're wrong on this, because we both agree here, obviously. It seemed pretty clear that Jackson established himself as the number 2 center as this season went on. He ended up he started games, he's 6'10", he's 22 as I said, but he started 30 games in his career, Matt, 12 and 6.5 with 2.3 blocks and a steal in 24 minutes in those 30 career starts with about 20% usage. 6.6% block percentage is huge. That's Clowney's was 4.1, for example. Big block guy. He finished at the rim at a high level, 72% as well. Not a great free throw shooter, but a high field goal player. But what is interesting to me is that we talk about the 3-point shooting from Noah Clowney, that Jackson did used to shoot threes. He doesn't anymore. He just stopped doing it. And that helps in terms of, if you're not going to hit him, it helps in fantasy because your field goal percentage shoots through the roof. And I think that sort of change in his game has enabled a little bit more confidence in Carlisle. Maybe he wasn't listening before and Carlisle hated that. And now he's sort of changed things over. But it does feel that he can really establish himself at bare minimum, like an 18 to 19 minute every night backup center who then will transition maybe into a starter in years to come. But it did seem like there was a slight subtle switch this season.
Yeah, I think this is the year that Isaiah Jackson started to become what we had hoped he was going to be coming into his second season. Because sometimes with these young big men, the block numbers give a perception that player is contributing defensively, that they are providing something of value to winning basketball. But often they're just chasing blocks. They're out of position. They're not actually helping their team defensively. And I think to some degree that was the case with Jackson. This year, it was not. This is the year that we saw Jackson becoming one of the better defensive role players in the NBA. He was playing limited minutes, but there was a consistency to what the Pacers wanted to do defensively that he was contributing to. And he did that while maintaining a really high block rate and a high steal rate. So this is a defensive event creator who is going to come in and disrupt things. And it might only be in 15 minutes, but it's going to provide value in fantasy and in real life during those 15 minutes, with the potential that if he ever starts, if we ever get Miles Turner walking out the door after this next year in his final contract year and the recent extension that he signed, if Isaiah Jackson did get the opportunity to start, which there are no guarantees, a lot that can change on an NBA depth chart very quickly through an offseason or two. But if that happened, if he played those kinds of minutes, we're getting to the upper 20s, the low 30s, then we have fantasy explosion. That's why you hold on to these guys in Dynasty, even through the dark times. And they have been dark with Isaiah Jackson. But now we know we have a guy who can actually contribute on the court, get the confidence of a coach like Rick Carlisle, and that creates that fertile opportunity for a larger minute load in the future.
What I find interesting with Jackson is you talk about that block percentage of the defensive contribution, you go to dunks and threes and look at some of their numbers, right? So his defensive EPM as a rookie was negative 0.9, 37th percentile, but he was in the 99th percentile for blocks at 8.1. It went down to 7.7, which was 99th percentile still as a second-year player, but his defensive EPM went from negative 0.9 to negative 0.1, jumped from 37th percentile to 60th. This season, his block percentage went from 7.7 down to 6.6, which is still great, from 99th percentile down to 97th. But that's from 8.1 as a rookie down to 6.6. But his defensive EPM went from negative 0.1 to plus 1.8, which is 92nd percentile. Blocking less shots, much better defender. Now that, again, you could say, well, how are they tracking, whatever you want to say. But that is a general rule that we tend to know. Young players go for more blocks, out of position. The Hassan Whiteside effect, he just never grew up. That they block more shots, but they defend poorly. You get better in terms of positioning yourself, being on the court longer, keeping those fouls down. The shots blocked drop, but the minutes rise, the impact rises, and we saw that is one of the perfect illustrations of that, I think, with Jackson this season.
Yeah, and I think the other piece that's missing here is that he didn't really have an offensive role prior to this season. And now you were seeing him become an elite rim finisher, 93rd percentile as a rim finisher, also with some improved rebounding. So overall, he became a really nice rotation big this season, and still young enough that there's potential for more. But I have so much more confidence. It's not just theoretical anymore. We get super intrigued by big block numbers in fantasy, especially in Dynasty. We want to get those guys, get them as many minutes as possible. But often it just never happens because they're only a theoretical rotation big man who doesn't really help their team when they get in there. The fact that he now has a role on offense, is able to be a finisher at the rim, and he can contribute defensively at the way that he did this year. There's a lot of confidence in Isaiah Jackson. And I don't think a lot of people are going to realize it in your leagues. They look at the minutes. He's averaging, 12 minutes a game. Maybe they saw him play a little bit against New York in the playoffs, but they're not really thinking of him as a guy who has the kind of potential that we thought. He's a post-hype sleeper. This is someone that you can probably acquire in your league, and it might not happen right away because Miles Turner might just be right back in the same role, but he could still contribute as a backup, still help you in fantasy during that time. And then there's the potential of his prime going forward where maybe something big happens and he does get that starting opportunity.
We're going to be back to talk one more NBA prospect and then some Dynasty rookies in a sec. But today's episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is America's #1 fantasy sports app with more than 5 million members now. It is the most fun and exciting way to play daily fantasy sports and get in on the action while you watch your favorite sports and players. You just pick more or less on 2 or more player stats for your shot to win up to 100 times your cash. With Prize Picks, you could turn $10 into $1,000 in a single game watching your favorite sports this summer. You make a Prize Picks lineup in as little as 60 seconds. You just need to pick more or less on 2 to 6 of those individual player stat projections, and then you are locked in. And with the NBA Finals still on, you can put numbers in there and put those lineups in, but hoops are still going. You can do it for the WNBA. You can put your Prize Picks player stat projections in on Caitlin Clark, for example, or you can do it for Asia Wilson. Whoever you like in the WNBA, all of those players and all those games are available on Prize Picks as well. So download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA for a first deposit match up to $100. Download the app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNBA. A first deposit match up to $100. Prize Picks. Pick more, pick less. It is that easy. Okay, Matt, we've got one more guy to go. I'm not going to ask you to guess what sort of position or height this man is because we already know he's a 6'10" big man. We're talking about Leonard Miller of the Minnesota Timberwolves. The Timberwolves had 2 guys that we were both interested in talking about. I am going to go with Miller. The other one is Josh Minott, who maybe is actually closer to contributing, but I think Miller's upside overall ends up being better. A guy that slid pretty crazily, I thought, in the NBA draft. And Miller is 6'10". He's a big man. He's 20 years of age. Now, we barely saw him in the NBA. The Timberwolves were #1 seed most of the season. Miller didn't play. Towns, Reed, Gobert, they're all there. But we all know that is not going to be a long-term scenario where those 3 players are all playing big minutes for the Wolves. That's just not going to be the case. 19 points in 31 G League games for Miller, 8 rebounds. Disappointingly, only 0.7 blocks. I would have hoped he did more there, but 3 assists. He played 30 minutes a night, 25 usage, 16 assist percentage. What I was really interested in, he shot 37% on his threes, Matt, but almost 10% of his three-point makes were pull-ups, unassisted. And that's really interesting. That's going to the G League and working. I'm not saying he's going to do that in the NBA, but that's working on something. That's not just being a catch and shoot, corner three-point shooting pick and pop big man. That's getting the ball and generating the shot yourself. And when 10% of your shots as a big man, as a rookie big man, are coming on self-created stuff, I go, that's a little bit interesting. Like, I'm really intrigued with that. What is it about Leonard Miller for you that gets you excited from a longer-term perspective?
Yeah, it's the 3-point shot creation, exactly like you said. I mean, he doubled his attempt rate this year on 3-pointers, and as you said, adding self-created threes to the table, shooting 37% across 31 games. That's a substantial sample size that tells us that Miller is improving to a degree as a 3-point shooter that it's really could be viable at an NBA level. And I think it needs to be. He's pretty skinny. He's a guy who played kind of more of as a wing coming up at amateur levels. So there's some face-up ability that I think makes Miller really intriguing. Really the swing skill for Miller and what's going to decide kind of his fate as an NBA prospect and whether he can really crack that Wolves rotation and ascend in that depth chart over time is going to be what can he contribute defensively, because we're not seeing the rim protection from him at the moment, but his offensive workload was much larger in the G League this year with the Iowa Wolves. So it's possible that, in a more limited role as a rotation player in the NBA, you might see those defensive stats, the rim protection come back up as the offensive role comes down. I think that's possible, but that's really what we're going to be looking for when we come into this next season. And that's one of the things that I want to try to impart upon everyone watching this. Not only do you want to look for the things that have improved, you want to look for and figure out what are areas of improvement that you want to see from these players, whether it's in the G League or in the NBA, things that are markers that you want to see them improve in that can get you ahead of the game and knowing that the breakout is coming. And if we see that from Miller, if we see the defensive improvement, kind of like we just talked about with Isaiah Jackson, where that defensive improvement comes, then I think we could really be looking at something special here, because that kind of size with the shooting ability, just like we've talked about with all these 6'10" prospects, that can really make a huge difference in today's NBA to take a guy from being kind of fringe rotation into solid rotation or starting. And I think that's where it's going to come from Miller. I also really like he could not pass in his G League Ignite season. This year we saw a lot more passing, and you can even see it in the highlight reel of him in the G League this year. This is someone who all of a sudden passing vision and an awareness of his teammates kind of clicked. And that was really exciting to be able to see, because there was a lot of tunnel vision before with him with the Ignite. He was not looking to pass. That improvement also makes a big difference, because we're talking about that ability to dribble, pass, and shoot. Miller seems to be developing a skill set to be able to tick those 3 boxes, and that's why I'm so excited about his future.
The good thing with Miller is that we can compare year on year in the G League, because he played for the G League Ignite. Obviously a different sort of idea and teammates, but he played 38 games for the Ignite. He played 31 games for the Iowa Wolves. Minutes were about the same. Assist rate went from 9.2 to 16.1. That's a huge jump up. Now, defensive stats stays about the same, but 3-point shots went from 2.4 per game to 5.4 per game. His 3-point percentage went from 30 to 37. As I've said so many times on this show through the draft process, G League Ignite prospects tend to shoot horribly in the G League Ignite, and then they almost always have a big improvement year 1, year 2, once they jump into an NBA type system. So he sort of fits that mold again, and had almost a 50% increase in the amount of unassisted 3-point makes that he had too. So that's huge also. So you brought up all the points I wanted to hit on. It's still a few years away here for Miller, is it? But he's 20. Like, when we're talking 23 at the end of his rookie contract, then maybe we'll see what happens with Towns or Gobert or Reed or whatever. But they should be starting to push him or Josh Minott into one of those larger roles. Question for you: do you think Miller and Minott can play together? Can they start together, or are they competing for the same role?
I think that there is some ability for them to be able to play together, because especially if we see Minott jump up in 3-point shooting the way that Miller did. But there's a little bit more on-ball creation ability with Minott that I think is untapped there, that would allow him to maybe play more as a 3. You could play a smaller lineup with them at the 4 and the 5. I don't think they necessarily have to be blocking each other. We're going to see Kyle Anderson potentially leaving in Minnesota. We don't know the fate of Karl Anthony Towns. Naz Reid's contract, he's going to be due for a big new contract after after this one is over based on what we saw from him this year. So there's going to be opportunity in both that front court and kind of that wing rotation for the Wolves, especially as they're expensive under their structure and need to be able to find inexpensive rotation players. I think both Minot and Miller fill that and are going to, in the next couple of years, have a big opportunity to be able to step up into that rotation like we've seen with some of the Nuggets young prospects like Peyton Watson, where there's a need to be able to infuse some athleticism and some youth into those rotation lineups that's inexpensive to be able to fill in around expensive star players.
We've got a lot more to talk about, so I don't want to harp on this too much, but just quick one-word answer. Would you prefer Miller or Minot, who's like a year and 2 months older?
I'm going to take Minot because the steal and block rates
they're
are fantasy gold.
Yeah, they're out of control. I agree. I think Miller probably ends up a better player, but it might be like the Clowney Jovic comparison where if Minot plays 23 minutes, it's the same as Miller playing 28, 29 minutes because those defensive numbers are pretty crazy for Josh Minot. Like it was like 2.2 blocks and 1.6 steals in the 33 minutes he played in the G League, comparing to what Miller did with those numbers. But we're going to talk NBA draft now, Matt, because you put out your Dynasty rookie ranks, which of course will be adjusted when the actual NBA draft occurs. I put out my early version of my tiers on a show 2 days ago talking about where these rookies sit. We have our processes and our formulas and our algorithms to put these guys into these positions, and we had a look at each other's, and there were 4 names that we came up with that we were quite different on, I guess, in terms of how we view these guys and where they sit dynasty-wise. So the first one we want to talk about, I want to talk about Ron Holland, speaking of the G League, because I've got Holland really quite high. I've got him at number 2 on my board. I cannot see me moving him from number 2 on my board. Yeah, there are some shooting concerns, but I just, with the lack of what I perceive talent in this class, I think that Holland's ability to have a usage role with really strong defensive numbers, and I am banking a little bit on the G League 3-point percentage phenomenon, which can improve him. I am pretty big on sitting him there, but Matt, you don't have him as, I've got him like equal tier 1 with Alex R. You do not have him there.
Now, I've got him a tier below, and I want to start by saying I like Ron Holland. I just have some concerns, but let's focus on the positive first and where he wins. This is a really good athlete. He's super competitive. He's high effort. There's huge defensive upside. He could be near the top of the league in deflections and steals consistently year over year. He was asked to be something that he had never been asked to be before with the G League Ignite. This is someone who came up at lower levels, kind of more as a power forward, maybe a little undersized for that, but played that way. And then suddenly came to the G League and was asked to have a huge on-ball role as a scoring wing. And he did his best with that. And in fact, near the end of his season with the Ignite, we really saw some nice games from him. I think he fell into that role a little bit better by the end of it. The issue is this, and I'm someone who advocated strongly for the Thompson twins last year, despite the fact that they could not shoot either. So I don't look at it and say that is a death knell for a prospect, especially in fantasy, to say that they can't that they can't shoot, because if they bring other things to the table, I'm on board. The problem is that when we're talking about dribble, pass, shoot, that coveted skill set, right now, Ron Holland doesn't really do any of those 3 things all that well. The handle is not that strong. He has some driving ability, but it's a loose handle. I think that the passing just did not show up this year. But again, this is his first time being put into this kind of role. That could come soon. And obviously the shooting, I think it was James Plowright, Hornets beat writer, who put out some tracking. And it was similar to the Thompson twins in that we're talking about 23 out of 99 attempts being bad misses, kind of hitting the backboard, air ball. That shows that there's a real issue there that's going to have to be worked out. And again, that's not a death knell. I think he can still be a really good NBA player, but I would want to see that playmaking. I would want to see a better handle. I would want to see some of the other fantasy elements of his game a little bit more developed. Right now, I view him as a guy who's going to bring you strong steals and maybe not be a plus contributor elsewhere, but the nice thing about Holland, the reason that I just have him a tier below is still, he's number 7 for me. He's right in there in the mix with a lot of other guys. When you have athletes of this level, like Ron Holland, where they're a really strong athlete, that's where they can transcend the numbers that you're seeing as a young prospect. We saw this with Anthony Edwards, who's a different level of athlete, but it's kind of this idea where if you are a super plus athlete, Anthony Edwards did not have great fantasy projections coming out of Georgia, but he launched into the stratosphere very quickly, and things started changing in his fantasy game and his real life game dramatically once he got into the NBA. And you realize that those projections were just not going to work for a guy with that level of athleticism once he was able to convert that athleticism to NBA skills. So we could see that with Holland. That's why I understand the case for him so high. I'm very curious to see landing spot. I want to see him in a good developmental organization that is going to be able to take him to the next level, that's going to be able to make him into a shooter. If we get that, I could see him being someone who moves up for me.
As much as like I think that he's the clear number 2, I don't want him to be in Washington. Like there's a lot of people mocking him at number 10 to Utah. I think that's actually fantastic. Like playing alongside spacing of Larry Market and defense with Walker Kessler there. Like I think that's a fantastic spot for him to fit and to develop and move into that role. It'll take a little bit of time. So like as in general, like if he falls, like I'll be like, these teams are. I think that they're making a mistake, but it generally means that you're moving to a better organization, and that does actually work out better long-term for dynasty potential. So as much as you go, that's annoying, it does put you into a better position. Podziemski, Trace Jackson-Davis, 2 names this season, fell to the Warriors where they could have gone much higher, but found themselves in a really good spot that did help their overall production, I think. The next guy we're going to talk about here is a guy that you are higher on than I am, and that is Donovan Clingan. All right. So, people have heard my thoughts on Clingan quite a bit. I just don't like. I understand he is going to be quite a good rim protector. The man is huge. He can't jump. I don't know what he does offensively. I don't know that he can actually stay on the court long enough to be more than a defensive role player. Sounds offensive to me, but it's not. It's like I don't think he's going to be a 33-minute a night big man. I think he's going to be someone who has defensive limitations, who then has a lot of offensive limitations, and that keeps his ceiling pretty low. Now, for fantasy, Matt, the block numbers are going to be really big. The field goal percentage is going to be big. There is a lot of the shape of a Walker Kessler, but Clingan can pass more. Do you think that there is, like, you've got him I said, higher than me? Is the fact that he sits, where is he at number 3 on your dynasty rankings? Is the fact that he sits there, is that more of a reflection of the other players around? Or do you just honestly believe that he is going to be a bigger minute player who will be that fantasy archetypal big man who puts up the field goals, rebounds, blocks at high enough rates to maintain consistent top 50 numbers?
Yeah, I think the key question here is what you just asked. Can Donovan Clingan beat the Walker Kessler allegations? Because we saw the limitations of a kind of big like Walker Kessler last year, because Walker Kessler was still able to do a lot of the same things defensively that he did in his rookie season. But the fact that if you are now in the modern NBA, you don't shoot and you don't contribute in the passing game, and you can't keep the offensive flow going in the NBA, it is really hard to play you big minutes. And I think this is the area where I may be more optimistic on Clingan as a passer because of the leap that he made as a passer this year, doubling his assist rate. You saw him make some really crisp and creative passes, 2 cutters, able to pass from the elbow, pass from the high post. I thought that was a dramatic improvement that gave me a lot more comfort about him being able to play bigger minutes. Understandably, he has the right foot tendon injury kind of near the beginning of the season. It takes him out for a few weeks. He is able to come into bigger minutes as kind of the postseason unfolds through conference tournament into the NCAA tournament. And we saw more of Clingan during that time. I think that conditioning is going to be an issue because he is massive. This is a really huge. Big center. And that is also a great strength. That's why he's going to be an elite drop big. But just if you don't have defensive versatility, and I think that is a question, he is slow-footed. I think he's smart. I think he understands that he can't play really high up at the level and is not going to be able to recover because he's not terribly fast-footed. But like someone like Brook Lopez, who has found a way to be able to be a really elite defensive contributor as a drop big, I think that there's an intelligence and feel level with Clingan that could allow him to do that. So for fantasy, the high end is really high because if we get big minute center, the blocks are going to be up there. Maybe, no one's going to be up near Wembanyama, but sub Wembanyama, we could be in that level, which is going to be awesome for that category. But the downside, then we get into territories of the Jakob Poeltls, the Ivica Zubac's, that's where we could end up, where Walker Kessler was this prior year. I think that Clingan is in that higher level where he's going to be able to potentially be a 30-minute a night starting center, but I understand the reservations. The one thing that I don't believe in, and I'm sure some people are hearing about Clingan, hearing about him shooting threes, when we talk about Brook Lopez was hitting like 80% of his free throws coming into the NBA. No, he was not shooting threes as a center at that time, but no one was when Brook Lopez came into the NBA. Yes, he developed that late. That is the exception, not the rule. It doesn't happen that way. And Clingan was a horrible free throw shooter across 2 seasons at UConn, around 55%, only attempted like 9 threes the entire time that he was at UConn. Don't buy into this hype. Every center tries to shoot threes during pre-draft workouts to try to convince teams that they should be taken higher. This happens every single year. There's no reason to believe it. Walker Kessler did the same thing. He even attempted more and is trying to at Utah. I still don't believe it either because he doesn't hit free throws. Put that aside. That's not going to happen with Clingan, but there's a lot of fantasy potential here, even without shooting.
In terms of, okay, so this is a hard question to answer, but knowing what we know now, Derek Lively was picked at pick 12 last year. Jalen Duren was 13 the year before. There's a player, an Australian big man, who's about the similar size to Clingan, who's like 7'2", I think, and he's going to be potentially a top 10 pick next year, Rocco Zagorski. I don't know if you know much about Rocco, so you can ignore that part if you don't. Like, where would you put Clingan in the Lively Duren group of these offensively limited centers? Like, they're sort of limited to pick and rolls and dunks and putbacks, but yeah, they have value from rebounding and field goal percentage and blocks. Where would you put Clingan in comparison to those guys?
Well, I mean, from a statistical perspective, I mean, Clingan overshadowed both Lively and Duren, who only got to play as freshmen pretty significantly in his second year at UConn. He scored quite a bit and got the ball in his hands quite a bit more than those guys. So showed some ability to be able to do it then, rather than just being a play finisher. So I like him more offensively than both of them. I like him a lot more defensively than Duren. And I think he's comparable, although different in his defensive versatility than someone like Lively. So I think that it slots in a little bit uniquely there. It's a little bit like if Yusuf Nurkic could actually play defense consistently. We got maybe like 1 year of that, and it was really great for fantasy because Nurkic does have some ability to be able to pass, really big, can give you some contributions offensively, and we never got the blocks at the level of the way that we wanted with Nurkic. We never got the defense. I think Clingan does bring that to the table. That's the kind of player that I think that we're going to be able to get if it works out offensively for Donovan Clingan.
I already know the problem with this next guy, and I know that I'm way higher on Tyler Smith than basically most people around where I've got him in my top 10 from a real life draft board perspective. I understand that. So you don't need to like convince me why I'm wrong on this, but you do think that I'm wrong on Tyler Smith. I just think that, again, in this sort of a draft class where I have very little confidence in a lot of players, I think Smith's ability, who as one of the only G League Ignite prospects to actually be able to shoot, that gives me huge confidence that he's going to be a pretty high-end shooter. He can't really defend well at this point. The defensive stats are fine. I'd like him to do a little bit more of that, but I do like this sort of a play, which is like a Taylor Hendricks archetype, a 6'10", small ball center, power forward who shoots, who theoretically could be able to defend and get some block shots. I do worry about the Smith name in terms of the Jalen Smith comparisons, but Jalen Smith, Matt, when he plays, he actually does have a really good fantasy skill set. Is your skepticism on Tyler Smith because of the fantasy skill set, or you just don't think that he's good enough as a prospect to actually demand those minutes moving forward?
I like him as a fantasy prospect. I think we can get plus blocks from him, and he doesn't really hurt you in any other categories. I mean, this was actually a pretty good G League Ignite season from a statistical perspective, better than most. The reason that I have concern with Smith is because on the interior, he's not an NBA player right now. And that's both offensively and defensively. Offensively, we'll start with first. So when we're talking about non-dunk attempts in the paint last season, he was at 48.8%. That's 8th percentile in this entire class, and that includes all the guards, everyone. 8th percentile. That's a nightmare for a guy of his size because he's not overly thin either. He has a pretty good body to be able to play in the NBA at this point, and he could not score on the interior at all, got pushed around. You might say, well, yeah, to be fair, that's in the G League. It's a professional league. The G League does not have great interior defenders. It doesn't have great centers. If they were good defensively, they would be in the NBA. That's the reality of it. So it's usually not as hard to be able to score at the rim for bigs as it was here. That's why you saw Noah Clowney dominate there. A lot of young bigs can score really well at the rim, and Tyler Smith didn't. And defensively, he just has no idea what he's doing out there at this point. And I think that partially can be on the G League Ignite. I don't think they put him in a good position. But right now, this is a guy who I don't know if you really have a home for him other than the shot. in the NBA. That's the skill that's going to get him drafted, and there might be a team that falls in love with that enough. I get it. He's just not a standstill shooter either. He's able to relocate and shoot really well. I really like that aspect of Tyler Smith's game. I just think the question is, can this guy play on the interior in the NBA on either side of the court? I don't know yet, and I think we'll get that answer from where NBA teams view him in this upcoming draft.
Yeah, look, if he falls into the 20s in this draft, then he will move down my dynasty ranks. Now, I do believe in the way that I evaluate players. I have to. I'm not just going to be like, well, if an NBA team says this, well, I guess that they're right. Like, no one could do that, right? We can't be in this game, Matt, and just defer all your opinions to somebody else. But if that does happen, then it will have an impact of where he sits. Like Leonard Miller, I had really high last year. I dropped him down a little bit because every team passed on him. I went, okay, what is going on here? Still believe in him, and as we detailed earlier, hey, maybe we were right, maybe teams were wrong. We don't know. But if he does end up falling, and you've got him like in the 20s in your dynasty rookie ranks, then I will push him probably back out of that back end of the top 10 where I've got him. I'll probably move into like 12 or 13 or whatever, because we do have to pay attention to how NBA teams view this, because we don't have all the information. We don't have the private workouts. We don't have the interviews. We don't have any of these things. But if NBA teams were right every single time, well, yeah, the league would be a lot different to what it currently is. Last guy. This is one of yours. It is Devin Carter from Providence. He's got the NBA familial pedigree. His dad, Anthony Carter, played in the NBA for years. His statistics, Matt, I can't really fault them. He is a 6'3" point guard who averaged almost 10 rebounds per 40 minutes with 2 steals, over a block, 22 points, 28 usage, shot the threes. 48% of his shots were threes, 56% effective field goal. All that's great. Number one, he's 22 years of age, which always makes me just drop a little bit back from a dynasty perspective. But I don't know that level of steals, assists, blocks, rebounds is going to translate even in the same sort of shape. Like, we're always going to cut back everything someone does moving from college to the NBA, like whether it's a 10% haircut, 20%, what it is. But there are some players who move and have these outrageous, Johnny Davis, rebound numbers as guards, or weird statistical outliers that just disappear completely. They drop like 90% and they become irrelevant in the NBA. And I worry a little bit about the blocks and in the rebounds in particular for Carter, just going back to being almost, say, like Cole Anthony level, which is above average for a point guard, but not this level where it's like 10 per 40.
Yeah, I agree. I'm not projecting Devin Carter at 6'3", even with a plus 6.5-inch wingspan, which is outstanding. I'm not projecting him to be able to carry over the defensive rebounding that we saw from him at Providence last year. And I don't think the block numbers are going to carry over either. He's probably going to be one of those guys who doesn't hurt you in those categories, which a lot of guards often do. He won't be one who hurts you, but he's probably not going to be a plus contributor there. I do think he's going to be a plus contributor in 3-pointers and steals. And this is a guy who I think fits kind of this archetype that we're seeing be really successful and valuable in the NBA. The Derek White, Jalen Suggs, Marcus Smart, Drew Holiday. We're seeing this over and over, these guys contributing to winning basketball teams. And I think Devin Carter fits into that perfectly, because he's not a guy who demands to be on ball to contribute offensively. And defensively, he can terrorize multiple positions because of his length and tenacity. That's the kind of guy that I think, in a class that is devoid of the elite star tier of talent, I'm willing to be able to take higher in a rookie draft, because I know where they're going to fit on an NBA court. I think it's J. Kyle Mann has been referring to Reed Sheppard as a universal donor, someone you can just kind of drop into any lineup and it works. I see Devin Carter very similarly, because the 3-point shot this past year at Providence made a huge leap. We're talking about 37.7% from 3 on 89th percentile volume. The volume number is what I care about more when it comes to prospects.
Agree.
Percentages can change very quickly with a couple of bad games or a couple of good games. I want to see high level volume. That tells me that this is a competent 3-point shooter who's able to get their shot in multiple ways. And we saw that from him. He was able to take contested threes at a level and make them at a level that we hadn't seen previously. He's also taking above the break threes and threes off of the dribble that he wasn't taking before. So that leap is something that I believe in for him. If he shoots at that level, plays defense the way that he does, I think he's going to be able to get a significant number of deflections, given the feel and the wingspan that we see. That's stable to me and has a high floor. And this isn't the kind of player that I would normally have around the top 5 in my rookie draft rankings, but this is also a draft where the top 4 or 5 prospects that you usually have at the top of a rookie draft just aren't there. So for me, Carter's someone that has continued to move up as it becomes clear that he's probably going to be a lottery pick and is being valued by NBA teams at that level. He's someone that I take above draft slot because of that ability. And when it comes to age, I can be an ageist when it comes to rookies. I can look at them and say, well, this guy's 22, 23. I don't like Dalton Connect. I don't like guys who end up kind of eventually just aging up to a point that they start beating up on younger competition when they weren't doing that at younger ages. When all of a sudden there's that big leap later on. Devin Carter, the rate stats, started out at South Carolina before transferring to Providence. The rates that he had, even if the minutes were lower, were similar other than the shooting, which made a big leap. The other stuff was there across time. And that gives me some encouragement that, okay, maybe this player who was only kind of like a top 100th recruit or so, but not a high-level recruit, didn't get that opportunity early on, but the seeds were there and the ability, the per minute ability was there. And that's what we saw with Carter. It gives me encouragement that he's going to be able to translate it, even if we're not going to see those big rebound and block numbers in the NBA.
Yeah, I agree with nearly all that. It's the age is that level of concern, but it's not as high of a concern as I have for others. Like, we've got him back-to-back with Steph Castle. I've actually got them back-to-back, but in the other direction with Castle one spot ahead of Devin Carter. But yeah, Castle's what, 2 years younger? Yeah, well, 2.5 years younger. So that does, we talk 2.5 years. That means that Castle's in year 3 and he's at the same spot in his development as where Carter is now. And I think that's part of the thing. Like, Carter will be probably better now, but you also have to remember that these things change. And we talk about third-year players in the NBA so often, how big steps they take forward. That where some of these players are going to be at that same Devin Carter age now, but they're in year 3 in the NBA, and that leap forward could be huge. But you're right about so many things. The steal rate is huge. I love the wingspan. I love the three-point volume. I have him high. I just don't have him as high as you have him at number 5. Matt, that is... That's it. We went for a long time because that's what we do. We talk about fantasy basketball. We talk about 4 NBA players. We talked about 4 NBA draft prospects. And now it's time for you to tell me about what's going on with you, what content people could find and where they can find it.
If you play in a Dynasty league, my goal, the thing that I want to do as a content creator is bring Dynasty content that you can't get anywhere else. And right now is the perfect time to be able to get on board with that. You can go to my Patreon at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. I just put up this week my rookie draft guide for the 2024 class, and it's loaded. I've got 120 prospects ranked, projected for fantasy.
That's a lot, man. I've got 101. you went further. There's some names on your list where I go, do I really need to look at Jermaine Cousinard? I don't know, but you've gone big.
If a guy is getting NBA workouts, I'm trying to put him on there because we continue to see with 3 two-way slots per team. If you are in deep Dynasty leagues, you need to know who these guys are because when they pop up, you can say, I know what the stat set could be here. And you're able to get that jump, especially you're in these like 20-team, 30-team leagues. Knowing those players is a massive edge. And I'm trying to give you that edge. That's the thing that this is kind of my hallmark content, my cornerstone content. I have tested this across over 10 years of NBA drafts to be able to see how it performs. It outperforms anything that I've seen because these stat sets are knowable. And if you have that advantage of already understanding the fantasy stat sets of prospects before they ever play an NBA game, you are so far ahead of your competition. So I'm going to be continuing to update these. I'm going to make sure that I get out a new update right after the draft. So you're ready for your rookie drafts. And I've got things, I've got every player in the NBA in my Dynasty rankings, 500 plus players. I've got a trade calculator that I put together now that will allow you to be able to assess the value of trades that you're getting, including being able to trade draft picks. These are the things that Dynasty leagues have in the NFL space that I want to make sure that you all have in the NBA space. So if you're playing in a Dynasty league or thinking about it, come check it out at patreon.com/NBA Dynasty ADP. I stand by it. I'm going to make sure that I take care of all of you and that we are all dominating our Dynasty leagues.
Did you have Malginha Pereira in your draft database? Or he's one of the ones that slipped through the cracks?
I think that slipped through.
Yeah,
I've got a list. I've got a backlog.
This is.
I got a backlog of about 30 guys that I haven't done yet. I'm going to try to get out to 150 before the draft starts, which would be a new record for me and just a level of degenerate behavior that I didn't think I could achieve in my life, but here I am.
I love it. I got to 126 last year, so I'm still working mine out. But I looked in through and I had to check. Do you have this guy on there, Yongshi Chui? I'm glad that you've got him there, number 77 from Guangzhou, because he had a workout with the Pacers yesterday, and he's the random prospect at the moment that I'm glad you got him on that list. He's got to get onto mine. That's the next step for me. Matt, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your knowledge, and people go check out Matt's Patreon. I've been a Patreon subscriber of Matt's for years and years, and he's always been a guest and willing to give his time to this show. Matt, thank you very much.
Thank you, Josh.
And that will do it for this Dynasty show. Thanks again for Matt for coming on, and check out his Dynasty rookie ranks. I've got to get those numbers up. I'll see if I can get him more prospects in than he has in the end. We'll have a competition at the end to see who's got more prospects on. But you know to give the thumbs up here on this video and leave your comments down below, guys. We are done here. Thank you so much for listening, everyone. See ya.